Have you ever been made to feel small? So small that your voice disappears and the entire world seems to be laughing at you? For Olivia Pierce, that nightmare became a reality at the one place she should have been celebrated, her own ex-husband's wedding. He stood before a crowd of their former friends and family, using his wedding speech not to celebrate his new love, but to systematically destroy her legacy, painting her as a failure he was lucky to escape. The air grew thick with shame, every eye burning into her. But they and he made one catastrophic miscalculation. They didn't know who was waiting in the wings, and they never imagined that the quiet woman in the corner was no longer alone. What happens next isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of reclamation, of a love so powerful it can silence an entire room with just two words. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't delivered in a standard envelope, but in a heavy, cream-colored box, tied with a thick silver ribbon. Olivia Pierce stared at it on her small kitchen island, the box itself feeling like an accusation. It was ostentatious, expensive, and so utterly Mark. Inside, nestled on a bed of synthetic silk, was a thick card of acrylic, the wedding details laser-etched into its surface. Mark Jennings and Brittany Davenport request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their union. Below the cursive script, the date, time, and the ridiculously lavish address for the Waterford Grand Ballroom were displayed. It wasn't an invitation. It was a trophy, a testament to the life Mark had built, or rather the life he wanted everyone to believe he had built in the 2 years since their divorce. A bitter laugh escaped Olivia's lips. She traced the smooth, cold edge of the acrylic. Mark had always been about surfaces, the perfect suit, the perfect car, the perfect wife who smiled demurely and never overshadowed him. For 8 years, she had tried to be that wife. She had folded her own dreams into tiny, neat squares and tucked them away in a drawer, all to make room for his sprawling ego. Her dream had been design, not just picking out throw pillows, but transforming spaces, breathing life into empty rooms with color, texture, and light. She had a genuine raw talent for it, but to Mark, it was a cute little hobby. An interior designer? He'd scoffed one night, swirling his scotch in a crystal tumbler she'd saved for months to buy. Liv, be realistic. It's a fantasy for bored housewives. I need you focused on my career, on us, hosting my boss, making the right connections. That's the real work. The real work had been a life lived in his shadow. She'd planned the parties, remembered the birthdays of his superiors, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and silenced the part of herself that screamed for a canvas and a palette. The final, crushing blow came at one of those very parties. She had excitedly shown Mark's CEO, a stern man named Mr. Abernathy, a portfolio of her work she'd secretly been compiling. Mark had snatched it from the man's hands with a tight, mortified smile. "Oh, you know Olivia," he'd said with a dismissive chuckle, patting her on the shoulder as if she were a child. "Always playing with her little projects. Don't worry, I keep her grounded in reality." The condescension in his voice, the pitying look from Mr. Abernathy, the quiet snickers from his colleagues. It was a public execution of her spirit. She filed for divorce the following week. Now, holding this ludicrous invitation, she felt the old wounds ache. Why had he even invited her? It wasn't an olive branch. Mark didn't have those in his garden. It was a summons, a command performance to witness his ultimate victory lap with his new bride, Brittany, a woman 10 years younger, with a vapid smile and an Instagram feed filled with brand sponsorships. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend, Jessica. "Tell me you threw it in the incinerator," Jessica's voice crackled through the speaker. "It's too heavy. It would probably break the incinerator," Olivia replied, a hint of her old humor returning. "So you're not going. Please tell me you're not going." "I don't know, Jess. A part of me, a stupid, masochistic part of me, wants to." "Why? So you can watch Captain Narcissus get everything he ever wanted?" "No," Olivia said, her voice dropping. "To prove to myself that it doesn't bother me anymore. To walk in there, head held high, and show him and myself that I'm fine, that I survived him." There was a pause on the other end. "Liv, you don't have to prove anything to that monster. You've spent the last 2 years rebuilding. Your business is finally starting to take off. You're happy. Why go back into the lion's den? Jessica was right. After the divorce, Olivia had taken what little she had and poured it into her dream. She started Pierce Designs, taking on small, low-budget projects. She'd painted walls herself, haunted flea markets for hidden gems, and slowly, client by client, built a reputation for creating beautiful, soulful spaces. It was hard, exhausting work, but it was hers. Every success, no matter how small, was a balm on the wounds Mark had inflicted. And then there was Alex. She'd met Alexander Sterling 6 months ago, a whirlwind of serendipity. He'd commissioned her to redesign a small corporate apartment his company kept for visiting executives, having been referred by a previous client. He was different from any man she'd ever known. He was quiet, but his presence filled a room. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her passion, his intelligent gray eyes full of genuine curiosity. He saw her sketches and didn't call them cute. He called them visionary. He was kind, grounded, and made her feel seen in a way she never had before. He knew about Mark, of course. She'd told him the broad strokes, the story of a controlling husband and a lost dream. He never pried, just offered quiet support. He was a private man, successful in his own right in the tech investment world, but he never flaunted it. To her, he was just Alex, the man who brought her coffee in the morning and held her hand while they walked through the park. The man whose calm presence was slowly healing the fractures in her soul. "What does Alex think?" Jessica asked, pulling Olivia from her thoughts. "I haven't told him about the invitation yet," she admitted. "He's out of town, meeting with some investors in Singapore. He gets back the day before the wedding." "Well, he'd tell you not to go. He'd tell me to do whatever I feel is right for me," Olivia corrected gently. That was the Alex she knew. She ended the call and looked at the invitation again. Mark believed he had broken her. He had cast her aside like a rough draft and was now flaunting his polished, finished product. He expected her to be a ghost at his feast, a walking reminder of his upgrade. A slow, defiant fire began to burn in her chest. No, she wouldn't be a ghost. She would go. She wouldn't go for him. She would go for the woman she was before him, and the woman she had fought tooth and nail to become after him. She would walk into that ballroom, not as Mark Jennings' sad, discarded ex-wife, but as Olivia Pierce, founder of Pierce Designs. And she would be more than fine. She would be whole. The Waterford Grand Ballroom was even more ostentatious in person. Towering floral arrangements, dripping with crystals, flanked an entrance so grand it felt more suited to a royal palace than a hotel. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a combination Olivia found cloying. She had chosen her outfit with surgical precision, a sophisticated deep sapphire sheath dress. It was elegant, powerful, but not flashy. It spoke of quiet confidence, not desperation. Her hair was styled in a sleek, low chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond studs. A gift to herself after landing her first major solo project. As she gave her name to the host, she felt the familiar prickle of being watched. Heads turned. Whispers like the rustling of dry leaves followed her as she stepped into the pre-reception hall. She recognized faces from her old life. Mark's colleagues, their wives who had once been her friends, distant relatives who had sent pitying texts after the divorce. Their expressions were a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and thinly veiled condescension. They saw her standing there alone and drew their own conclusions. There's poor Olivia. Can you believe she actually showed up? She looks all right, I guess. A bit tired. Mark must be loving this. Her being here just proves he won. She kept her chin high, a serene, practiced smile on her lips, and made her way to a quiet corner, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. She held it like a shield. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. You can do this, Liv. Breathe. You are not that person anymore. Then she saw him. Mark was holding court near the entrance to the main ballroom, his arm wrapped possessively around Brittany's tiny waist. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, his smile wide and predatory. Brittany, in a mermaid-style gown that was undoubtedly more expensive than Olivia's first car, clung to him, laughing a little too loudly at something he said. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping over the crowd like a king surveying his subjects, and then they landed on her. His smile didn't falter, but it changed. The warmth, however manufactured, vanished, replaced by a cold, triumphant glint. He saw her standing alone, her solitary figure a stark contrast to his triumphant pairing. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that wasn't a greeting, but a confirmation. I see you. I see you're alone. I've won. Olivia met his gaze and gave him a small, polite nod in return, then deliberately turned her attention back to the room, refusing to let him see the tremor in her hand. The chimes called them into the main ballroom for the ceremony. The room was a sea of white and silver. A massive floral arch stood on a raised dais, looking like it had been stolen from a fairy tale. Olivia found a seat in the back, behind a pillar, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. The ceremony was brief and impersonal, filled with flowery language about soulmates and eternal devotion that sounded hollow coming from Mark. During his vows, he turned slightly, his eyes finding her in the crowd again. Brittany, he began, his voice amplified by a microphone. You came into my life when I needed you most. You taught me what it means to be with a true partner, someone who lifts you up, who shares your ambitions. I promise to leave the past behind, to shed the baggage of old mistakes and build a future worthy of your light. The jab was as subtle as a punch to the gut. Baggage, old mistakes. He was talking about her, about their 8 years together, reducing their entire marriage to a footnote of failure in his glorious new chapter. The guests shifted uncomfortably. A few shot her glances of pity. She felt her cheeks burn with a hot, creeping shame. This was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just a summons, it was a public flogging. She focused on a loose thread on the tablecloth in front of her, digging her nails into her palm. She had to stay. Leaving now would be an admission of defeat. She had to see this through. As the couple was pronounced husband and wife, and the room erupted in applause, Olivia remained seated, her hands clasped in her lap. The battle was over, and Mark had seemingly won, but the war, she was beginning to realize, had only just begun. The reception was next, and she had a sinking feeling that Mark was saving his most devastating blow for last. She just prayed that Alex would call soon. Just hearing his voice would be an anchor in this swirling vortex of humiliation. The transition from ceremony to reception was a blur of forced smiles and awkward encounters. Olivia managed to navigate the minefield of "so good to see you" and "you look well" from people who clearly meant the opposite. Each interaction was a small paper cut on her already frayed composure. She found her assigned table, tucked away near the kitchens, a clear social demotion. She was seated with a second cousin of Brittany's and an elderly couple who had known Mark's grandparents. The conversation was stilted and died quickly. She ate little, pushing the seared scallops and risotto around her plate. The clinking of cutlery and the cacophony of cheerful chatter felt alien, as if she were watching the scene from behind a thick wall of glass. Her phone remained silent in her clutch. Alex was probably still in meetings, halfway across the world, unaware of the coliseum she had willingly walked into. Finally, the dreaded moment arrived. A champagne flute was tapped with a spoon, and Mark's best man, a boisterous sales rep named Gary, took to the stage. His speech was predictable. A few embarrassing anecdotes from their college days, praise for Brittany's beauty, and a toast to the happy couple. It was harmless, standard wedding fare. Then Mark stood up, taking the microphone from Gary. A hush fell over the room. He beamed, soaking in the attention. He looked directly at Brittany, his face a mask of adoration. "My beautiful wife," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Today, I am the luckiest man on earth." He went on, thanking their parents and guests. It was all so perfect, so polished. Olivia felt a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would be gracious, that the vows had been the extent of his cruelty. She was wrong. After the perfunctory thank yous, his tone shifted. He leaned into the microphone, a conspiratorial look on his face. "You know, a lot of people see this," he said, gesturing around the opulent ballroom, "and they see the culmination of a story. But for me, this isn't just a beginning. It's also an ending. It's the end of a long, difficult chapter. a chapter of settling. A nervous cough rippled through the crowd. Olivia's blood ran cold. She knew exactly where this was going. Before Brittany, I didn't fully understand what it meant to have a partner who truly shares your drive. Mark continued, his eyes scanning the room until they found Olivia's table. He didn't look directly at her, but he didn't have to. Everyone followed his gaze. She was the only ex-wife in the room. I was with someone who was content with smaller things, with little hobbies and pipe dreams that don't exactly pay the mortgage. The laughter from his friends at the head table was sharp and cruel. The little hobbies. He was mocking her life's work, the business she had bled for, in front of 200 people. Olivia felt the air leave her lungs. Her face was a mask of stone, but inside she was crumbling. The pillar she was hiding behind suddenly felt very, very small. I tried to be supportive, he said, putting on a show of magnanimity. But there comes a time when you realize you can't carry someone else's lack of ambition on your back. You need an equal. You need a co-pilot, not a passenger. To build an empire, you have to be willing to shed dead weight. Dead weight. The words hit her with physical force. He had called their marriage baggage during the vows, and now she was dead weight. He was systematically stripping her of her dignity, piece by painful piece, rewriting their history to cast himself as the ambitious hero and her as the anchor that held him down. She could feel the eyes on her, not just pitying glances now, but judgmental stares. They were believing him. He was charming, successful, standing there in his perfect suit with his perfect bride. His version of the story was so much more compelling than the quiet, complicated truth. Her vision started to blur. The crystal glasses, the silver candelabras, the smiling faces. It all swirled into a vortex of shame. She wanted to run, to scream, to disappear. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to hide them under the table. Jessica was right. She never should have come. This wasn't closure. It was a public execution, and she had handed him the sword. So I want to toast not only to my future with my incredible wife, Brittany, Mark said, raising his glass, his voice reaching a crescendo, but also to my past, for teaching me exactly what I don't want in a partner, for making me strong enough to walk away and find what I truly deserve. He was about to drink. The entire room was poised to join him in a toast to her failure, to her humiliation. It was the final, devastating blow. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the smirk on his face, the smug satisfaction in his eyes. He had won. He had utterly and completely destroyed her. And then, from the back of the ballroom, a voice cut through the suffocating silence. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight and authority that instantly silenced every other sound in the room. "That's enough." The two words hung in the air, sharp and clean as shattering glass. Every head in the room, including Mark's, snapped towards the main entrance. Standing there, framed by the absurdly large floral arrangements, was a man. He wasn't dressed in a tuxedo, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the entire wedding cake. He was tall, with an air of stillness that was more commanding than any shout could ever be. His silver gray eyes swept across the room with a cool, assessing gaze before landing on the stage. Olivia's heart stopped. It was Alex. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. He looked tired the way a person does after a long international flight, but his posture was resolute, his presence an immovable object. A wave of whispers washed over the room. Unlike Olivia, who was a ghost from a past life, this man was instantly, shockingly recognizable to many in the room, especially the business-minded guests Mark was so desperate to impress. "Is that, Alexander Sterling? The CEO of Sterling Global Capital? What is he doing here?" Mark stared, his mouth slightly agape, the champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips. The smug triumph on his face had been wiped clean, replaced by utter confusion. He squinted, unable to place the man who had just hijacked his moment. "I'm sorry," Mark said into the microphone, his voice suddenly sounding reedy and unsure. "Who are you? This is a private event." Alexander Sterling didn't answer immediately. He began to walk forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace that drew every eye. He wasn't walking towards the stage. He was walking towards Olivia's table. The crowd parted for him as if by instinct. As he drew closer, Olivia could see the hard line of his jaw, the protective fire in his eyes. It was a look she had never seen before, and it made her heart ache with a feeling so potent it almost brought her to her knees. Mark, flustered and indignant, tried to regain control. "Security! Can someone please escort this gentleman out?" But no security guard moved. They, like everyone else, were mesmerized, sensing that they were witnessing a fundamental shift in the balance of power. Alexander reached the stage, stopping directly in front of it. He looked up at Mark, who stood there like a startled peacock, microphone in hand. Alexander didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked Mark in the eye and said, with chilling finality, the two words that would define the entire night. "Shut up!" The command was absolute. It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the casual authority of a man who was used to being obeyed without question. The effect was electric. If the room had been quiet before, it was now utterly, breathlessly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. The microphone slipped slightly in his sweaty palm. Having delivered the verbal coup de grace, Alexander turned his back on Mark completely, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a minor annoyance. He walked the final few steps to Olivia's table. The elderly couple and Brittany's cousin stared, wide-eyed, as this titan of industry stopped beside Olivia's chair. He ignored them. He ignored the hundreds of eyes trained on them. He only saw her. He reached down, his hand warm and steady, and gently covered hers, stilling the tremor she couldn't control. "Are you all right, my love?" he asked, his voice low and intimate, a stark contrast to the icy command he had just issued. Tears she hadn't even realized were forming finally spilled over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, a wave of overwhelming relief washing over her. He was here. Her anchor had arrived. He squeezed her hand gently, then helped her to her feet. He stood beside her, a protective arm settling around her shoulders, turning them both to face the stage, to face her tormentor. The tableau was striking. The humiliated ex-wife, no longer alone, but flanked by one of the most powerful men in the country. The game had just changed, and everyone in the room knew it. Mark Jennings stood on the stage, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, anger, and dawning horror. He looked from the imposing figure of Alexander Sterling to the woman beside him, the woman he had just publicly branded as dead weight. "Olivia?" he stammered, the microphone amplifying his bewilderment. You know this man?" It was the question that hung in the air, the one everyone was desperate to have answered. Alexander Sterling let the question hang for a moment, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable peak. Then he looked away from Olivia, his gaze sweeping over the silent, gawking crowd. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the ballroom without the need for amplification. "For those of you who don't know me," he began, his tone matter-of-fact, "my name is Alexander Sterling." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The name alone was a shockwave. Sterling Global Capital was a legend in the financial world. They didn't just invest, they built and dismantled empires. His name was synonymous with power, wealth, and ruthless efficiency. "And this remarkable woman," he continued, turning his head to look down at Olivia, with an expression of such profound love and admiration that it stole the breath from her lungs. "This brilliant, talented, and resilient woman is Olivia Pierce, my fiancé." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Fiancé. The word detonated in the silence, obliterating the narrative Mark had so carefully constructed. The pitying looks directed at Olivia instantly morphed into expressions of stunned disbelief, then awe, and finally dawning respect. Brittany, the new bride, looked as if she'd been slapped. Her perfectly made-up face was pale with shock, her eyes darting from Alexander to Mark, a flicker of doubt entering them for the first time. Mark looked like he'd been poleaxed. "Fiancé? That's not possible." Alexander's gaze hardened as it shifted back to Mark. "What isn't possible, Mr. Jennings? That a woman of her caliber would find happiness? Or that you were so profoundly blind You couldn't see the treasure you had? He took a small step forward, his arm still securely around Olivia. You stood up here and you spoke of ambition. You belittled what you called her little hobbies. He paused, letting the words sink in. Let me tell you about Olivia's little hobby. 2 years ago, she started a business from scratch with nothing but her talent and a courage you can't possibly comprehend. That business is called Pierce Designs. He then looked towards a table near the front where several well-known real estate developers were seated. They were now leaning forward, hanging on his every word. Perhaps some of you have heard of it, Alexander continued. Pierce Designs was recently awarded the exclusive contract to design the interiors for all 22 of our new line of Sterling Signature hotels across Europe and Asia. It's a 9-figure contract. Silence. Complete, dumbfounded silence. A 9-figure contract. The number was so staggering, so far beyond the comprehension of anyone in Mark's world, that it seemed to suck the very air from the room. Olivia's pipe dream was a multi-million-dollar international enterprise. Alexander wasn't finished. I met Olivia when I hired her, on the recommendation of 3 other CEOs who were astounded by her work. I saw her portfolio and knew instantly I was in the presence of a true artist. My initial investment in her company was the single best financial decision I made last year. She didn't need my money to succeed, let me be clear. She needed an opportunity, something her previous partner was clearly too small-minded to ever provide. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing Mark's inflated ego. He was shrinking on the stage, the custom suit suddenly looking too big for him. The microphone hung limply in his hand. Alexander's voice dropped, becoming colder, more personal. You talk about shedding dead weight to build an empire. You don't have an empire, Mark. You have a mid-level sales job and a mountain of debt you took on to fund this, he said, gesturing dismissively at the gaudy ballroom. Olivia, on the other hand, is building a real empire, one based on creativity, integrity, and hard work, the very qualities you seem to know nothing about. He looked directly at Mark, his eyes like chips of ice. You didn't shed dead weight. You threw away a diamond because you were too ignorant to see it wasn't a common stone. You wanted a partner to applaud your ambition, but you couldn't handle a partner whose ambition and talent dwarfed your own. He then gave the crowd a final, sweeping glance. So no, I don't think we'll be toasting to your past, but I suggest you all remember this moment, the moment you witnessed a man publicly confess his own mediocrity. The spell was broken. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Mark Jennings, the triumphant groom, was now an object of ridicule, a fool who had publicly humiliated himself in the most spectacular fashion. The whispers started again, but this time they were not for Olivia. They were about Mark, about his catastrophic misjudgment, his unbelievable arrogance. Olivia stood tall, the tears on her face now dry. She felt a strength coursing through her she had never known. It wasn't just Alex's presence, it was the truth. The truth spoken aloud had finally set her free. She squeezed his hand, her heart full. Alexander looked down at her, his expression softening once more. Let's go home, he murmured, for her ears only. She nodded, ready to leave the circus behind forever. With a final, withering dismissal of the man, who was now little more than a statue of shock on the stage, Alexander Sterling gently placed a hand on the small of Olivia's back, a silent, steadying anchor. He guided her away from the table, their movement a single, fluid motion. The path to the exit, which had been an agonizing gauntlet upon her arrival, was now a silent, gaping corridor. The guests, who had seemed like a monolithic wall of judgment just moments before, now parted for them like the Red Sea, their faces a gallery of astonishment, envy, and belated respect. As they began to walk, Mark's voice, shredded with desperation, tore through the stunned silence. Wait! Alexander paused for a fraction of a second, but did not deign to turn around. His entire posture conveyed that whatever Mark had to say was utterly inconsequential. Abernathy, my company, Mark stammered, his mind clearly struggling to process the cataclysm that had just befallen him. He was grasping for the pillars of his identity, the very things he had sacrificed Olivia for. He respects me. I'm a senior partner. This time Alexander did turn his head, just slightly, a gesture of almost bored indulgence. A cold, razor-thin smile touched his lips. It held no humor, only the chilling finality of a predator ending a hunt. "You were a senior sales manager, Mr. Jennings, at Northgate Holdings. A fine company." He let that hang in the air for a beat. "As it happens, my primary reason for being in Singapore was to finalize the acquisition of a 51% controlling stake in Northgate's parent conglomerate, Titan Industries. The deal was signed 36 hours ago. The press release is scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday. The second detonation was quieter than the first, but infinitely more destructive. If his fiancée announcement was a shockwave, this was a sinkhole that opened directly beneath Mark's feet, swallowing the very ground he stood on. Brittany let out a small, strangled gasp and unconsciously took a step away from her new husband, as if proximity to him were now a contagion. Mark's own parents, seated at the head table, looked horrified, his father's face ashen, his mother covering her mouth with a trembling hand. Alexander's voice dropped, becoming the clipped, precise tone of a CEO delivering unwelcome news. "Mr. Abernathy and I have a board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. The first item on the agenda, as it now must be, is a review of executive conduct and its potential impact on brand integrity and shareholder value. We have a zero-tolerance policy for public behavior that creates a toxic environment or exposes the company to ridicule. I'm sure you understand. It's just business." He then turned his full attention back to Olivia, the icy corporate titan melting away to be replaced by the gentle, protective man she knew. "Shall we?" He didn't wait for an answer. As they walked, the sound of the ballroom changed. The dead silence erupted into a frantic, high-pitched buzz of whispers. Phones were already being raised. Olivia could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her back, but for the first time, she felt no shame. She felt tall. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and matched Alexander's steady pace. She wasn't being rescued. She was executing a strategic withdrawal from a battle that had already been won. The massive ballroom doors, which had felt so intimidating, now seemed to swing open for them. As they closed, they shut out the frantic noise, plunging them into the relative quiet of the hotel lobby. The cool night air that greeted them outside felt like a baptism. The valet, a young man who had witnessed Alexander's imperious entrance, practically vaulted over the podium to retrieve the car. It was a sleek, understated black Bentley, its quiet elegance a stark rebuke to the garish limousine Mark had rented for the occasion. As Alexander held the passenger door open for her, Olivia paused, looking up at his face in the soft glow of the hotel lights. "Singapore?" she asked, a small, watery smile touching her lips. The lie was so audacious, so perfect. "A necessary fiction," he murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "My flight from Geneva landed an hour ago. I came straight here. I had a feeling you might need a getaway driver." "You came all this way, just in case?" "I would cross oceans for you, Olivia," he said, his voice low and sincere as he tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. I thought you knew that by now." She slid into the plush leather seat, the scent of which was a world away from the cloying lilies of the ballroom. Once he was beside her, and they were pulling silently away from the curb, leaving the circus of the Waterford Grand behind, the dam of her composure finally, completely broke. It started as a shuddering gasp, a single tear escaping. Then another. Within seconds, she was crying, her body shaking with the force of it. But these were not the hot, silent tears of shame she'd shed at the table. This was a torrent, a flood of everything she had held back for years. Tears for the young woman who had believed in Mark's hollow promises. Tears of rage for the way he had systematically dismantled her confidence. Tears of grief for the years lost to his shadow. And finally, beneath it all, tears of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. It was the sound of a cage door, rusted shut for years, finally being blown off its hinges. Alexander didn't speak. He simply reached over, his large, warm hand covering hers on the center console. He drove with one hand, his presence a solid, unwavering comfort in the storm of her emotions. He let her cry until the wrenching sobs subsided into quiet, hiccuping sniffles. He pulled a clean, linen handkerchief from his suit pocket and passed it to her. When she could finally speak, her voice was thick and raw. "Thank you," she whispered, dabbing at her eyes. No one has ever stood up for me like that." "I hope you know," he said, his gaze fixed on the road but his attention entirely on her, "that none of that was for me. It wasn't about showing my power or playing the hero. Every word was for you." He paused, navigating a turn. "I listened to him talk, and I felt a rage I haven't experienced in years, not just because he was insulting the woman I love, but because he was trying to extinguish a light that deserves to illuminate the world. He was trying to convince you, and everyone else, that his version of your story was the truth. He almost succeeded," she admitted quietly. "No, he didn't," Alexander countered firmly. "He was convincing the sheep. You were never one of them. You endured it, and that takes a strength he can't possibly comprehend." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "What I did tonight was not an act of rescue, Olivia. It was an act of clarification. I simply held up a mirror to a fool and made sure the light was bright enough for everyone to see his reflection." She finally looked at him, her heart swelling with a love so profound it felt like it might crack her ribs. "You called me a diamond," he threw away. "The metaphor is inadequate," he said with a small smile. "A diamond is hard, but it can be shattered. You, my love, are more like a star." He thought he could eclipse you, but all he did was create a moment of darkness that made your eventual light seem all the brighter when the obstruction was finally removed. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights of the skyline glittering like a promise ahead of them. The wreckage of the wedding, of Mark's life, was already shrinking in the rearview mirror, becoming an insignificant speck in the past. "So what now?" Olivia asked, the question filled not with anxiety, but with a new, thrilling sense of possibility. Alexander reached over and squeezed her hand. "Now," he said, his voice full of warmth and certainty, "we go home, our home, and tomorrow we start building your empire. Pierce Designs has a world to conquer, and I will be there, not to lead the charge, but to carry your portfolio and tell anyone who will listen that I am the fiancé of the most brilliant designer in the world." A genuine, bubbling laugh escaped her lips, the first truly carefree sound she had made all night. It was the sound of freedom. As he turned onto the road leading to their shared penthouse, the city sprawling beneath them, Olivia felt the last vestiges of Mark's shadow burn away in the glow of the oncoming dawn. She was not just a survivor of his story. She was the author of her own, and the next chapter was going to be magnificent. The immediate aftermath of their dramatic departure was a whirlwind of media frenzy, albeit one that Alexander skillfully shielded Olivia from. The few guests who had the wherewithal to discreetly record snippets of the confrontation with their phones had inadvertently ignited a social media firestorm. Wedding Crashers, Billionaire Edition, and Ex-Wife Revenge, Level 1000, were just a few of the trending hashtags. The stark contrast between Mark's boastful toast and Alexander's devastating rebuttal was irresistible fodder for the internet. Within hours, Mark's carefully constructed facade crumbled. News outlets dug into his background, revealing the extent of his debts, his history of inflated self-importance, and the precariousness of his empire. The acquisition of Northgate Holdings by Sterling Global Capital became the top business story globally, overshadowing even the wedding itself. Mark Jennings, the groom who thought he was on top of the world, was now a pariah, his future hanging by a thread. Brittany, predictably, was nowhere to be found, her social media account suddenly silent. The fairy tale wedding had dissolved into a very public nightmare. Olivia, however, found herself in a different kind of spotlight. Pierce Designs' website traffic surged. Inquiries flooded her inbox from potential clients who had witnessed or read about the Waterford Grand incident. Alexander's public declaration of her talent and the confirmation of the Sterling Hotel's contract acted as an endorsement more powerful than any marketing campaign. Her little hobby was now a global sensation. Alexander, ever mindful of her well-being, whisked her away to his private estate in Tuscany. It was a sprawling villa nestled amongst rolling vineyards, a world away from the flash and fury of the online storm. There, surrounded by the beauty of the Italian countryside, Olivia began to process everything that had happened. The quiet days were spent exploring ancient olive groves, sharing leisurely meals under the Tuscan sun, and simply being in each other's company without the weight of the past or the pressure of the present. Alexander was a calming presence, offering support without being intrusive, allowing her the space to heal and to fully grasp the magnitude of the shift in her life. One evening, as they sat on a stone terrace overlooking the moonlit landscape, sipping local wine, Olivia finally spoke about the wedding. "It feels surreal," she said, her voice soft, "like a very bad dream. But then you were there." Alexander took her hand, his gaze warm and steady. "It was no dream, Olivia, and I will always be there." "Why did you come back early?" she asked, her fingers tracing the lines on his hand. "Your meetings in Singapore were supposed to last another day." "They concluded earlier than expected," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "But the truth is, I had a feeling. You hadn't mentioned the invitation, and that in itself spoke volumes. I couldn't shake the unease. Something told me you might need rescuing." "Rescuing?" Olivia chuckled lightly. "I wasn't exactly tied to the tracks." "Perhaps not literally," he conceded, "but emotionally, Mark was attempting to derail you, and I couldn't allow that." "You didn't have to do that, Alex," she said, her voice earnest. "I was prepared to just endure it, prove to myself that his words couldn't hurt me anymore." "And could they?" he asked gently. Olivia hesitated. "They stung, more than I wanted to admit. But your words, they were like a shield. And more than that, they were the truth. Hearing someone else, someone I respect so deeply, articulate my worth, it was more powerful than any silent affirmation I could have given myself." "Your worth was always there, Olivia," Alexander said, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Mark's inability to see it was his failing, not yours. You are an extraordinary woman, a force of nature disguised as quiet grace. The world needed to see that." In the days that followed, Olivia started to look forward, not back. She began sketching new designs, inspired by the beauty of Tuscany, her creativity flowing unburdened by the self-doubt Mark had so skillfully cultivated over the years. Alexander set up a temporary office for her in the villa, ensuring she had everything she needed to manage the burgeoning interest in Pierce designs. The news from back home continued to trickle in. Mark had been suspended from his job pending an internal review. His reputation was in tatters. Most of their mutual acquaintances had quietly distanced themselves, realizing they had backed the wrong horse. Olivia felt a pang of something akin to pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of relief. The toxic tendrils of her past were finally being severed. One morning, Alexander handed her a tablet. On the screen was an article from a prominent architectural magazine announcing Pierce Designs as the recipient of the prestigious Rising Star Award. The accompanying interview featured Olivia, her passion for her craft evident in every word. "They reached out after the wedding," Alexander explained. "They were already impressed with your portfolio, but the visibility you gained cemented their decision." Olivia stared at the screen, a wave of emotion washing over her. It wasn't revenge she felt, but vindication. Her talent, her hard work, was finally being recognized on its own merits, not as a footnote to someone else's story. "This is incredible," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes again, this time tears of pure joy. "You deserve it all, Olivia," Alexander said, pulling her into a warm embrace. "This is just the beginning." Their engagement deepened in the tranquil embrace of Tuscany. Without the distractions of their busy lives back home, they had the time and space to truly connect, to share their dreams and fears, to build a foundation of trust and understanding that went far beyond the initial spark of attraction. Olivia discovered layers to Alexander she hadn't seen before: a dry wit, a quiet vulnerability, a deep empathy hidden beneath his reserved exterior. He, in turn, was constantly amazed by her resilience, her artistic vision, and the unwavering kindness she extended to everyone she met, despite the pain she had endured. As the weeks passed, the initial shock waves of the wedding incident subsided, replaced by a quiet hum of anticipation for Olivia's future. Pierce Designs was thriving, her creative vision in demand globally. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the vibrant, successful present she had built. They eventually returned to their lives, but everything had shifted. Olivia moved into Alexander's penthouse apartment, a spacious, light-filled haven that she immediately began to personalize, transforming it into a reflection of their shared life. The contrast to the small, stifling apartment she had shared with Mark was stark, a tangible symbol of her newfound freedom and success. The wedding invitation from Mark, once a symbol of spite, now seemed like a bizarre artifact from a distant, almost forgotten time. Olivia kept it tucked away in a drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as a testament to how far she had come. Life with Alexander was everything she had never known she wanted. He was her partner in every sense of the word, celebrating her successes, supporting her through challenges, and always seeing her for who she truly was. He never tried to dim her light. Instead, he encouraged it to shine brighter. One evening, as they were preparing for a gala celebrating the launch of the Sterling Signature hotel line, a project for which Olivia's designs were garnering rave reviews, Alexander stopped her as she was fastening her earrings. He took her hands in his and looked deeply into her eyes. "You know," he said, a soft smile on his face, "that night at the Waterford Grand, it was the worst kind of humiliation, orchestrated with the cruelest intent. But it also became the catalyst for something beautiful. It forced the world to see what I already knew, that you are extraordinary." Olivia smiled back, her heart full. "And it showed me that I wasn't alone, that I had finally found someone who would not only stand beside me, but who would also tell the world to shut up if they dared to diminish me." He leaned in and kissed her gently. "They won't have to. Your talent speaks for itself now, my love. Your light is undeniable." As they walked hand in hand toward the waiting car, ready to face the world on their own terms, Olivia knew that the drama of that ill-fated wedding had faded into the background, replaced by the quiet confidence of a woman who had risen from the ashes, her wings stronger and more beautiful than ever before. Her empire was not just built of steel and glass, but of creativity, resilience, and the unwavering belief in her own worth. And this time, she was not just surviving, she was soaring. And so, Olivia Pierce drove away, not just from a wedding, but from the last shadow of a man who never knew her worth. Her story isn't just about a dramatic confrontation, it's a powerful testament to the fact that your value is never determined by someone who is incapable of seeing it. It's about the quiet strength it takes to rebuild, the courage to believe in your own dreams when no one else does, and the beautiful truth that the right person won't just love you, they will champion you. Mark wanted to be the star of his own story, but in the end, he became nothing more than a footnote in hers. Olivia's real story was just beginning, written not in spite, but in success, light, and a love that was strong enough to silence the noise and let her true self be heard. What did you think of Olivia's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you had to reclaim your own narrative? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.